Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that you're a trillionaire. Not a millionaire, not a billionaire, a trillionaire. Sounds amazing, right? Well, not if your entire fortune can't buy a sandwich. Seriously. 20 years ago, people in Zimbabwe carried around $100 trillion banknotes, and many of them still struggle to afford lunch. No, I'm not joking. This actually happened. Workers rushed to spend their salaries before lunchtime because by dinner their money could buy less. Prices changed so quickly that some restaurant menus became outdated before customers even ordered. People carried bags full of cash. Some used wheelbarrows. Imagine pushing a wheelbarrow, not because you're building a house, but because you're buying groceries. Sounds ridiculous, because it was. But here's what makes this story even crazier. Zimbabwe wasn't always poor. In fact, its currency used to be worth more than the US dollar. Yeah, seriously. So, how does a country go from prosperity to printing $100 trillion banknotes? And how do you become a trillionaire and still go hungry? Well, the answer starts with something surprisingly simple: bad decisions, and lots of them. Back in the 1980s, Zimbabwe looked like one of Africa's brightest success stories. People called it the Breadbasket of Southern Africa. Its farms supplied food across the region. Its literacy rate was among the highest in Africa. Industries were growing. Businesses were expanding. And believe it or not, one Zimbabwe dollar was actually worth more than one US dollar. Life wasn't perfect, but compared to many countries, things were going pretty well. Then, the late 1990s arrived, and everything started changing. Government spending increased dramatically. Zimbabwe became involved in the Congo War. Foreign investors became nervous, and controversial land reforms severely disrupted agriculture. Food production fell, exports declined, foreign currency became scarce, and suddenly the government had a problem. A very expensive problem. There wasn't enough money. Now, when most of us run out of money, we cut expenses. Governments sometimes have another idea, and that idea is the money printer. Need money? Print money. Simple, right? Well, not exactly, because printing money is a little like trying to cure hunger by photocopying pictures of pizza. Sure, you'll have more pictures, but you're still hungry. And at first, nothing seemed terribly wrong. Nobody panicked. Life went on. But slowly, prices started rising. Then they rose faster, and faster, and faster, until things became completely absurd. But before we continue, if you enjoy documentaries that explain economics, business, and the crazy stories shaping our world, without boring PowerPoint presentations, consider subscribing. Because some of the most unbelievable stories in history are completely real. And trust me, Zimbabwe's story is only getting started. By the early 2000s, inflation had become everyone's worst nightmare. Imagine buying bread for $10,000, then returning the next day, only to find that same bread costs $100,000, then $1 million, then $10 million. Eventually, people stopped saving money altogether, because saving cash became like holding an ice cube in the desert. Every minute, it melted away. Workers would leave the office and run straight to the supermarket, not because they loved shopping, but because waiting until tomorrow meant becoming poorer. And then, things became truly insane. Banks couldn't print cash fast enough. A TMS ran out of money, not because there wasn't enough money, but because there was too much money. Which sounds impossible, until you realize inflation had completely broken the system. People stood in line for hours to withdraw billions. Imagine telling your grandfather, "Sorry, Grandpa, I only brought $50 billion today. Sounds funny, except for millions of Zimbabweans, it wasn't funny at all. And somehow, things were about to get even worse. Because when prices kept rising, the government had a brilliant idea. Or at least, they thought it was brilliant. Print even more money. And so, new banknotes appeared. $1,000, $10,000, $1 million, $1 billion, $1 trillion, $10 trillion. And finally, the most famous banknote in modern history, the $100 trillion bill. $100 trillion. A number so ridiculous that many people today buy these notes as souvenirs. But during the crisis, nobody wanted them. Because every new banknote meant bad news. Very bad news. It meant your savings were disappearing. Your pension was disappearing. Your future was disappearing. Not because someone robbed you, but because inflation did. And then, in November 2008, Zimbabwe achieved something no country wants to achieve. Economists estimated annual inflation had reached 89.7 sextillion%. Yes, sextillion. A word so absurd, most people have never used it in their lives. If numbers had a game over screen, this was it. Prices doubled within hours. Not weeks, not months, hours. Imagine buying eggs in the morning and discovering they cost twice as much before dinner. At that point, money itself stopped making sense. People no longer trusted the Zimbabwe dollar. And that's when something fascinating happened. Because money only works if people believe it works. Without trust, money is just colorful paper. Fancy paper, but paper. People started using US dollars, South African rand, Botswana pula, anything. Some people even returned to bartering, trading eggs for soap, soap for vegetables. Imagine living in the 21st century, owning a cell phone and paying for groceries like it's the year 1820. Crazy, but real. By 2009, the government finally admitted defeat. The Zimbabwe dollar was abandoned. People switched to foreign currencies, mostly the US dollar. And almost overnight, something incredible happened. Inflation collapsed. Shops worked again. Businesses reopened. Prices stabilized. Life slowly became normal. Which revealed one of the most important lessons in economics. Money itself isn't wealth. Paper isn't wealth. Printing more money doesn't create prosperity. Because you can't print food. You can't print factories. You can't print productivity. And perhaps most importantly, you can't print trust. Today, Zimbabwe is still rebuilding. And while the country faces many challenges, those famous $100 trillion banknotes remain a reminder. A reminder that becoming a trillionaire isn't always a blessing. Sometimes it's a warning. Because perhaps the strangest thing about this story is that the world's most famous trillionaires were some of the poorest people on earth. And all because, one day, money stopped working. And once trust disappears, even $100 trillion might not be enough to buy lunch. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more deep investigations into Africa's hidden economies